morning class. Today we shall begin with the next topic in our textbook, that is Unit 2, that is 2.4, the fall of Troy. It is a beautiful story about war heroes. So let's go through the story and see what it has to say. In Greek mythology, the Trojan War was waged against the city of Troy by Achaeans, that is Greeks, after Paris of Troy took Helen from her husband Menelaus, king of Sparta. The war is one of the most important events in Greek mythology and has been narrated through many works of Greek literature. Most notably, Homer's Iliad. The core of the Iliad, that is books 2nd and 223rd, describes a period of 4 days and 2 nights in the 10th year of the decade-long siege of Troy. The Odyssey describes the journey home of Odysseus, one of the war's heroes. So what are the two books related to, right? Okay, now it is a story between a prince of Paris, that is the name of a prince of Troy, who took Helen. Helen is a queen from her husband Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Helen was the queen of Sparta. So this is war between Paris and Sparta. The story is all about that. Okay, so this war had been went on for 10 long years, children, which is a decade, right? Okay, now it narrates all experiences about that. Let's see the story. The epics are long poems that relate the deeds of a great national hero or a national war. They often tell of a nation's early history. They may be composed or sung or recited for many years before they are actually written down. So how do we learn about what events have been taken out in the past? So we learn them from the epics. And what are epics? Epics are long poems. They are sort of a long poems which relate to the deeds. They are generally poems based on the deeds of the war heroes or the national war, describing the scene. Okay, so they may be composed or sung or recited for many years, many years. Like people used to verbally pass it on by singing before they are actually written down. Okay, now the two famous Sanskrit epics are the Ramayana and Mahabharata, which belongs to our country, right? India. We are like very famous, we are very well known about these famous epics of our country, that is the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. In the similar manner, the two great epics of European literature written in ancient Greek are the Iliad and the Odyssey. Just like we have Ramayana and Mahabharata, they have Iliad and Odyssey. Just as in Indian literature, we go back to stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and so in the literature of Western countries, they go back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? So this is how they relate to their epics, just as we do up to our epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Okay, so we'll wait here for a small break, children, and shall be back again. Yes, class. So let's continue with our story and see what actually happened for the war to be caused. Okay. Now, it is believed that the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed and recited by a blind poet named Homer, who lived about 900 BCE and who wandered from one Greek city or a village to another, singing his poems to all who would receive him in their homes and give him hospitality. This wandering singer has been honored through the ages, not only in Greek but also in all Europe, as the father of European poetry. Very important content, children. Okay, Iliad and Odyssey were composed and recited by a blind poet. Means who is the composer of it? The Iliad and the Odyssey. It is the Homer. They say that he lived in about 900 BCE and he wandered from one Greek city or a village to another, singing poems to all the people. He would go and sing the poems, and in return people would provide him hospitality, like serve him with food and the other requirements. So this wandering singer has been honored through the ages, not only in Greek but in all Europe, as the father of European poetry. That is how Homer has been so very much important. So that's the reason the Iliad and Odyssey are like totally, you can say, connected or related to Homer only. He is the one who has actually composed them, or you can say he is the one who brought it into happening. So just as children all over the India know the names of stories of Ram and Sita, Yudhishthira and Arjuna and Draupadi, so children in Western countries know the names of Hector, Odysseus, the Achilles and the Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, because of whom the Greek and the Trojans fought for 10 long years. Nobody knows for certain who the author of these early epics is. It is thought that they arose and developed with the nation itself and were handed down from a singer to singer till perhaps one of the great poets gave them their final form. So this is like, just we as a children, since it is our epic, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, we are like well versed with the characters in it, right? As they are mentioned in the epics. Similarly, the people of Western countries are familiar with their characters in that epics. They are like Hector, Odysseus, Achilles, and Helen of Troy. So these are all like very, very, very famous over there. Helen was considered to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Okay, and because of him, the Trojans and the Greek fought for 10 long years. This is nobody knows for certain who the author of this early epics is, means who is actually the writer of the epics. That is not known. So it is thought that they arose and developed with the nation itself and handed down from singer to singer till perhaps one of the great poet gave them their final form. Okay, so we'll take a break over here, children, for a minute, and we'll be back again. Good morning, class. Today we shall continue with our story of Fall of Troy. Previously we had seen that Iliad and Odyssey were composed and recited by a blind poet named Homer, who lived about 900 BC and wandered from one Greek city or village to another, singing his poems, who would receive him in their homes and give him hospitality. So let's proceed with the story and see and learn about the story of Troy. The Iliad is the story of Ilium or Troy, a rich trading city in Asia Minor near the Narrow Sea that leads from the Aegean to the Black Sea. It was well situated both for commerce and agriculture. In front of the city was a sea over which sailed the ships of Troy carrying goods and grain. You can have a location. Look at the picture, children. So you see how the city is located here, and right in front of it was a big sea which carried its ships which would carry goods and grain. Okay, so this was like very helpful for them for transportation. Okay, and further, to add to the beauty, at the back rose the high peak of Mount Ida, from which flowed many rivers and streams. The valleys among the hills were well watered and fertile. The corn growing in the fertile fields and cattle feeding on rich grass of the meadows, while sheep fed on the slopes of the hills. This location made the city very, very fertile, okay, because it was plentiful of water was available, and that made the land very fertile, and this in turn made the city very self-sufficient. Now, around their city, the Trojans had built a strong wall so that no enemy could attack them from the sea. The wall was so broad that people could stand and sit and walk on it. The great gates stood open, and people could go to the seashore outside and come in as they pleased. But in the time of war, the gates would be closed, and then the city was like a strong fortress, quite safe from all attack, protected by the walls surrounding it, as well as by the hills behind. So we see, children, how people were like, so very much alert, and how they were like protecting themselves by building a strong wall. This wall was to defend them from any enemy attack. And if the times were peaceful, the city gates would be open. You can see there are different locations of city gates. Those gates would be open to the people. They could go to the sea and come back as they liked and pleased. But in case of war, the gates would be closed and city would look like a strong fortress. So here we will wait for a small break, children, and continue after a small break. Yes, class, let's continue with our story. Now, in the previous session, we saw the location and the beautiful how beautiful the city was. Okay, so now we should continue to see what made Greece declare a war against the Trojans. Okay, thus Troy was a strong city, strongly protected by its walls and strongly defended by its brave soldiers. But all the kings and heroes of Greece had declared a war against Trojans because Paris, who was a prince of Troy, had persuaded Helen, wife of Greek king Menelaus, to elope with him. He had brought her to Troy. The Greeks wanted to take revenge on Troy for the wrong done to Menelaus. They sailed to Troy and laid a siege to the city. The Trojans too fought hard, and the siege continued for 10 long years. Okay, so you see here, children, Prince of Troy named Paris, he persuaded Helen. Who was Helen? Helen was a wife of a Greek king, Menelaus. So Paris convinced Helen to elope with him, and he brought her to Troy. Halaki, she was married, she was a queen. Still Paris dared to elope her and bring her to Troy. Obviously this would anger the Greek people, and so they wanted to take revenge on Troy for they had done wrong with the Menelaus. So they sailed to Troy and laid a siege to the city. The war was tough. The Trojans too fought hard, and the siege continued for 10 long years. It was not a matter for a year or a two. It went on for 10 long years. The fighting went on daily, but the siege did not end. On one hand, the Greeks could not take the city, and on the other hand, Trojans could not force them to sail away. Every day, the Trojans came out of their gates, and the Greeks came out of their tents and ships, and the fighting went on. Sometimes there were great battles between the two armies, and sometimes there was single fight between the two great heroes. Sometimes the Trojans had the better of it, and sometimes the Greeks. But still the fighting went on. You can understand through the scenario, children, how tough the war could have been. Because none among them were ready to give up. Even the Greek people were not ready to give up. They were not ready to lay off the siege. And even the Trojans were not ready to give up. But they could not be successful in asking the Greek people to sail off back to their country. Okay. So we wait here for a small break, children, and continue after a small break. Yes, children, let's continue. Now, in the previous session, we saw that Paris, the prince of Troy, he made Helen, the queen of Menelaus, to elope with him to Troy. Now, no king could take this insult, right? So, definitely, this was the reason for the war that happened between Greek and Troy. So, let's see how the war proceeded and what happened. Great heroes on both the sides were killed in the course of the war, right? They were great, because the war was very tough. If it would have been simpler, it would have come to an end within a year or two. But we saw that it went on for 10 long years. 10 long years means both the teams were equally strong and no one was ready to give up. But gradually, towards the after the period of 9 years, say towards when they started moving towards 10 years, now everyone actually lost their patience now, and the great heroes on both the sides were killed in the course of the war. After leading the defense of his city for 9 years, the brave Hector, you can see it in the picture, the brave Hector was at last killed by Achilles, whom none could resist. Achilles was also very, very powerful and nobody could resist him, and so he was able to kill them. But Achilles himself was killed later on by a poisoned arrow. The way to kill, he could not be easily killed, because whole his body was covered with that armor. See, you can see the way the soldiers are dressed up. That dressing up is called as an armor. So the entire body is protected. Only a part of the body was left uncovered. Okay, and so Achilles himself was killed later on by a poisoned arrow that entered his heel. The only part of body where could be wounded. That was the only part left where he could be wounded, the heel. If someone spotted and hit him there, that was the only thing that could kill him. And that happened gradually, children. Okay. Still later, Paris himself was killed. Paris, who was the prince of Troy, he was also killed even by a poisoned arrow. That means he too was killed by a poisoned arrow itself. The Trojans were tired of being shut up in their city because people were locked down. It was a war time and the gates of the city were not open. So people were now really tired of being shut up, and Greeks were longing to see their home again. Now Greeks were also landing on the city of Troy. They had put up a siege, and now even they were tired of being here and they also wanted to go back to their home again. But still the fighting went on. But fight was not over, and so none of them were able to go or leave the place and go. Okay, so we wait here, children. That's our end of the part 1. We shall continue with the part 2 in our next session.